All right, I think we are good to get going. So thank you again for joining today, our webinar, Healthcare and Cloud Innovation on AWS, hosted by Trend Micro, Logicworks, and AWS. We are really excited. And today we have three amazing industry experts as our guest speakers. First off, we have Felipe Costa. Felipe is a solutions architect at Trend Micro. He's been with Trend Micro for a while and has over 10 years experience helping enterprises achieve a high-level cybersecurity posture by understanding customers' pain points and addressing security challenges based on today's risks and emerging trends. As a solutions architect at Trend Micro, he's deeply engaged with DevOps and cloud teams and is always working to guide customers to leverage technology to shift left security in a DevOps world. Next up, we have Matt Sharp, the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer at Logicworks. Matt's responsible for information security governance, risk management, strategy, architecture, and compliance. Before joining Logicworks, Matt served as the head of global information security at Crocs Inc. And finally, last but not least, we are going to hear from Donny Wilson. Donny is the global security and compliance senior solutions architect for worldwide public sector at Amazon Web Services. Donny advises healthcare customers in the areas of security and compliance, threat detection and response, and building resilient architectures. And he has over 25 years of experience in healthcare and enterprise IT. As 2022 is quickly coming to an end and 2023 is fast approaching, I think we know that priorities are and will be adjusting. And in today's webinar, we are going to cover the macro level trends that we will be contending with and why they matter. Additionally, we want to share building blocks for business success and inform you of how to optimize your cloud environment as we move forward to work better together, not just in 2023, but well beyond. And now, without further ado, I will kick things off to Matt.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the introduction. So, as you mentioned, we're going to focus briefly up front on the macro context for 2023. Here on the graphic, you can see, starting on the left, obviously, there's a fair bit of economic turbulence, and that's definitely coming to light as we've seen a number of tech layoffs, Microsoft, and we've seen a number of cybersecurity companies like Logicworks and CyberReason and a handful of others starting to really experience some of the constraints of the global macro environment. If you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, you can see a number of squiggly lines in different colors. That's basically a representation of a variety of different macroeconomic environmental elements that are having an impact on inflation. And towards the bottom, on the bottom left, you see some really large spikes in purple. That's the Russia-Ukraine war. And before that, you see a number of elements coming at us from delays in global supply chain and impact from COVID-19 over the last 18 or so months. All of this leads us to the conclusion that we will continue to experience inflation, and that inflation is obviously driving the Fed to adjust the Fed rates. That means that cost of capital is more expensive. And inherently what that means is that investors are going to flip their focus as growth slows to make sure that companies are appropriately and strategically aligned to really focus on profit and driving more efficient, cost-effective outcomes. So I would anticipate that we're going to continue as we lean into, dare I say, a recession, to see a right sizing on aggressive growth companies. And I think that we're also going to need to experience more appropriate adjustments inside of cybersecurity teams in order to empower the business to really drive outcomes that matter for business. Let's hit the next slide here. Perfect. So here you can see we're talking about business demands that result from intense social and economic volatility. What do we mean? We're going to obviously continue to see a focus on driving additional revenue, scaling productivity, which is also going to have a positive impact on cost structures. I think finding new forms of efficiency in terms of decreasing time to market is something that companies have talked about for a long time, obviously going to continue to be important. So that ability for companies to be agile, deliver increasing levels of value to increasing numbers of customers is going to continue to feature prominently, especially as the dollars available to spend, those discretionary dollars, are going to become fewer and fewer. And then finally, as we leverage the cloud's global footprint, a number of organizations are going to take advantage of regions and availability zones in order to get more immediate access to customers in a variety of different markets as revenues contract. So the big picture here is we have a contracting economy, and we need to be able to directly connect our cybersecurity actions to the core drivers and value mechanisms inside of a business. At the end of the day, I just highlight here, I've got a picture of the book that I published earlier this year as a best-selling book. We actually help folks walk through connecting to understanding how to read financial statements, dissecting value chains, understanding business model, and then directly relating security strategy to valuation. In particular, we give some case studies along the way. So I encourage folks to check out the book if you're interested in this topic as a means for really connecting more tightly your ongoing activities directly to business outcomes as those business outcomes shift and change throughout the changing economy. We can hit the next slide here. So the other trends that we've got going on, in addition to some social and economic pressures, is we can see that broadly there's a large trend, and appreciate the work that Ron Ross and others over at NIST have done to refocus ourselves on resilience as opposed to strictly business continuity and disaster recovery. We're seeing emerging regulations such as the SEC rules on cybersecurity. Those, of course, directly impact a number of our healthcare organizations that are publicly traded. And then we're seeing forward progress being made for platform players and other folks to be able to interact more directly through automated means and normalized data flows. I'm very excited to see where the progress with the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework and Common Information Model takes us. And lastly, no doubt ransomware has captured the world by storm. It's got a lot of attention in terms of finance departments. There are a number of folks who have historically been able to renew cyber liability policies for relatively cheap. We've seen in the last 2 years, maybe 300 to 800% growth on fees for premiums for insurance policies. And then naturally, as those policies have gone up and we've seen a lot of folks get caught by ransomware, we've also seen a number of organizations not be able to get cyber liability policies at all, as their control mechanisms are substandard or not passing minimum requirements for underwriters. So all of this comes to bear, and I think maybe some discussion with some of the panelists. So maybe Donny and Felipe can join me here for a few minutes, but we've got this backdrop of a contracting economy. We've got a number of increasing regulations and other trends that are driving increasing levels of complexity. Maybe Felipe or Donny, can you offer, I'd like to hear, where have you seen customers in the healthcare space in particular struggle as they're either moving to the cloud or continuing to operate long tail run and operate in the cloud?
Yeah, so I'll go first. I think the biggest investment of time that I have with customers is really just kind of fully understanding where their information security program is, the maturity of that program, and then how to leverage the cloud in an appropriate way to offer both the protections as well as, like you said, help mitigate some of the financial risks that are involved there by putting protections in place. And I think some of the things that we're seeing happen, especially in the areas of being able to attest and have like these underwriters validate their environments, I think becomes easier in the cloud after you essentially explain some of the capabilities that we're going to talk about here in a little bit later in the session.
So it sounds like both understanding your requirements and then being able to continuously map those, not just at the onset, but on day 180 is a particular challenge that you're seeing customers grapple with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to your point, like underwriters are no longer taking your word for it, filling out forms or whatever. They're actually asking for evidence, and organizations that don't have those operational best practices in place, or maybe the ability to kind of demonstrate their capabilities of those things that are set up, are definitely showing up in those conversations.
Oh, interesting. So real-time demonstration of control efficacy is also featuring in the underwriting process. That's interesting. Felipe, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I think for the security perspective, what I see is many customers struggling because they have different teams from security and from when it actually need to build an application or modernize the application. So what I usually see is the silos that they create between the security teams and the applications teams not be able to meet compliance, for example. So compliance is one of the biggest challenge that the healthcare system has. And then when you start to building applications so fast, like this is very difficult in the security side to actually keep your compliance up to date. So this is one of the requirements that many different healthcare organizations have today. And this is one of the places that AWS, Trend Micro, and Logicworks can actually help a lot, because we do talk a lot of customers. We know a lot of different challenges that they have. And this is one that we can actually help for sure.
Interesting. Yeah. So in particular, where environments have a lot of entropy, keeping pace can be challenged. And then what I also heard you say, Felipe, if I'm capturing correctly, is the engagement model between teams obviously has to change as you move into more agile practices. And that puts pressure on cybersecurity teams to both modify the way that they function from a cultural perspective, as well as enhance the skills that they bring to the table. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that is very interesting is when you see security teams and application teams, usually if you're lucky, you probably have one or two people from the security team, like hundreds and thousands of developers on the other side. So it's very difficult to actually keep it up with all the different requirements that you have on the security side, or all of the changes that has been made to your production environment. So this is a very difficult situation to actually taking care of.
Yeah, I think a common metric that I see is one security person to 100 developers. And that tends to be like a declared or deemed an appropriate staffing level. We can debate whether that's true and how that economic pressures either improve or not that metric. Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, I think this is a great start. I know that Donny's got a handful of prepared comments and is going to help further lay the groundwork for us in terms of what AWS brings to the table as organizations hope to innovate and disrupt the healthcare industry. So with that, why don't I hand it over to you, Donny, and maybe you can walk us through a handful of additional concepts, and then we'll, I think, circle back up for a little bit more discussion.
Okay, yeah, sounds great, and thanks. So I think the way healthcare is being delivered today is changing, right? Like even as individuals and consumers of healthcare, we are expecting and in some ways demanding a different healthcare experience. So at AWS, we kind of focus on building products and services that enable innovation for those changes that are occurring in our healthcare industry. And so that being said, it does have to be done in a way that provides both a secure and resilient methodology and foundation. So essentially that's my entire focus of my role at AWS. And so to lay the groundwork, I like to start with a couple of foundational concepts, I guess is what I'd call them. And they're essentially keys to how to operate and be secure and compliant on AWS. And the first one would be the fact that AWS, is obviously the public cloud. AWS public cloud services is got a rigorous compliant and security program in place. And so we have over 90 different certifications, attestations, and accreditations that we've essentially brought in third-party auditors for, and they go through all of the services. They put it through the tests and essentially produce reports that are validating and essentially giving confidence to that basically AWS is doing what we say we're doing. And then we turn around and sort of thinking about how to extend that, communicate that in clarity to our customers. We essentially make those available through a service called AWS Artifact. And so in the console, you can actually go and download and review those third-party reports, across the board, and leverage those to your own advantage to kind of, essentially see what has been done, what controls have been tested, and essentially, if you're building on top of that, AWS cloud infrastructure, essentially you get to inherit those particular controls that have already been validated by those third-party organizations. And so this is kind of even more evident as you kind of think about how we build our services. If you kind of peel back the onion a little bit and look at how the design is in place, they're all built with foundational capabilities and security in mind. So we always like to say security is top of mind at AWS, and the way we do that is by example is we have like a logging service that essentially AWS interacts, whether you're in the console, the API, it interacts through an API. And so those API calls get logged in that service called AWS CloudTrail. And another example, encryption in transit would, for example, so all the endpoints that we have the capability of leveraging TLS so that you can build that into your ecosystem as you develop or leverage AWS services. Encryption in transit is something that you can enable. And then likewise, we have a vast number of storage services, and all of those storage services have the ability to have encryption turned on. And so it really just kind of lays, like I said, the foundation for building, resilient and secure offerings on top of AWS. Another common concept that comes up pretty frequently, and I think we need to dive into a little bit, is around data privacy. So when you put your, for example, let's say you move some of your data to AWS, sensitive data, that data belongs to you. So kind of think about that compliance program, kind of extending into privacy. We don't, AWS doesn't move your data. It stays, in your control. It stays in the region that you put the data in. So, you have full control of that data and sort of where it goes and how long it lives, where it does, whether or not it's encrypted or not. And obviously we try to, make that encryption available to you at scale through a service called Key Management Services, or KMS. And so, as customers, understand sort of the capabilities that AWS offers, privacy becomes something that they realize they can actually not only achieve, but essentially maybe even kind of extend and leverage even greater capabilities that may or may not be possible in their on-prem environment. And of course, all of these different controls and mechanisms and capabilities certainly, play into your overall strategy and allow you to, essentially meet compliance and regulatory requirements for your particular area or locality. So, we just really try to enable customers to have the options and the features that are available to build out and achieve a higher level of success and security posture than they could, otherwise. Another key aspect of this, as far as like privacy goes, is if all of those capabilities still don't kind of meet your particular requirements, if you have some kind of hesitancy, you can actually bring your own key material from, from your own organization into AWS, and then leverage that key material to encrypt your data, therefore even adding a greater level of confidence that your data has been secured is not related party. So probably foundational to most, like I said, most organizations are familiar with a lot of security concepts, but paramount to AWS is something called the shared responsibility model. And it's broken down into two components, which is security of the cloud and security in the cloud. And so AWS is responsible for what we call security of the cloud. think about all the physical data centers. Think about that are there. Think about like the physical networking that goes between those data centers, the physical protection of the hardware that goes into the data centers. That is all what we call the security of the cloud. And AWS is obviously responsible for protecting that to the highest levels, that meet the the highest levels of requirements from different customers. And certainly healthcare falls into those regulated industries. But essentially, like I said, we don't actually access customer tenant environments. We don't have access to the data in those environments, and therefore, we have a shared responsibility there of what we call security in the cloud. So think about all the resources that you deploy into your AWS environment. If you bring data to that environment, if you stand up an EC2 instance, or you start leveraging, a particular service in AWS, you have a responsibility there to turn on the features that we build into those services and products and services. So that's why we call it a shared responsibility model. And folks like myself, we're available to help customers understand what those capabilities are and make sure that you, in fact, are deploying those in a way that can meet particular requirements. You just have to share in that responsibility, because we don't actually go into your environment and do that. So like I said, we like to say it's more of a partnership or relationship where we share in that responsibility together. So with that being said, let's kind of take a look at healthcare specific conversations. And so we have something that we essentially maintain on our public website. It's the HIPAA eligible services list. And currently there's 137 plus services there. And those are the services that you kind of focus in on for anytime you have to put PHI in your AWS environment. You need to use those eligible services. And basically what's happened there is we've gone through an extra level of evaluation to make sure that if you store, process, or transmit the PHI, essentially these are the services that have been evaluated to meet those requirements. And of course, high trust is a fairly common requirement as well. So, we actually have a separate list that we maintain for those services, and essentially customers, can help us shape that. So if there's a particular service that hasn't necessarily made that list, but you find value in it, basically, let us know, and we can prioritize the evaluation of that service. But essentially, because of the half-life of services and, the way things evolve, as Matt was talking about earlier, that list is constantly being evaluated as new services and products come out from AWS. We're essentially always evaluating whether or not they can or they fall in the scope of that list, and and evaluating those to be on the list itself. And that kind of leads me to essentially we have this concept. It's called it's a framework. It's called the well-architected framework. And in particular, we have a couple of different pillars in it. And two of those pillars, one of them is security and the other one is resilience. And so this is an example of the services that fall into our security pillar. And, you can see that it's organized in a way that it kind of walks you through the different capabilities that a lot of information security programs have. And these are the technology services that help you enable those inside of AWS. So, whether you're looking at identity access management all the way through, your incident response capabilities, and in essentially looking at your compliance requirements, these services are organized in a way and provide what we call foundational building blocks that allow you to, achieve a higher level of security posture on AWS, and then ultimately, set things up in a way to help you, be secure, but also scalable and deliver the most value to your business and your organization. And so with that, I'd like to kind of start thinking a little bit about, how we can help customers with that. And so an example of this would be essentially, what does it look like to put all these components together for a particular healthcare organization? And this is an example of where we've leveraged automation and those foundational building blocks to come up with what we call a landing zone, which is essentially your initial deployment on AWS in a way that essentially accelerates or helps you meet some of, many of those requirements for a healthcare organization. And so, I think this would be a really good time to kind of start talking about how, even though AWS provides these tremendous number of foundational services, it doesn't necessarily guarantee compliance. It doesn't guarantee that you're doing everything that you need to do. And I think that's where, this story kind of weaves itself into working with partners such as Logicworks or Trend Micro. They kind of fill in some of the gaps there, or help you address some of those, concerns that you may have that AWS by its initial building blocks doesn't necessarily answer in a cohesive story. So, Matt, or Felipe, what are some of the things that you and Trend Micro are doing to kind of fill in some of those gaps?
That's a great question. So thank you, Donny, for the presentation. So I'm actually want to talk a little bit about how we can actually use all these building blocks that Donny explained and how we can actually complement the security features that AWS provides. So just following the share responsibility model that Donny mentioned. So we do have customer have the responsibility to actually secure the data, and AWS will take care of all of the security for the cloud itself. So we don't need to worry about things like physical access to the data center or even networking, things like that, but you need to be able to secure your data. And this is where a partner ISV like Trend Micro goes in, because we do have a platform that helps customers to actually secure and provide complementary security to all these different building blocks. So as soon as you migrate your applications to AWS, for example, you might just migrate EC2 machine, a VM to support your application. Maybe you're using an S3 bucket to that. So the Trend Micro Cloud On platform integrated with your AWS account will be able to provide these different security controls that you might even have that in your on-premise environment. As soon as you migrate, you want to migrate the security controls as well to support your applications in the cloud. So this platform, as soon as you start to migrate to AWS, or even you start to modernize your applications on AWS, these different security controls will actually help to meet your compliance levels and all your internal security levels that you should have. So it doesn't matter if you're building EC2 machines, containers, serverless functions, or even if you're building things like network, if you're migrating endpoints to AWS or even S3 buckets as well, there's for sure, there will be a different security control that we can provide to this customer. So since this is a platform, so there's many cool things that we can provide to customers. So for example, we can provide a single API. So if you want to automate your workflows, you can automate your workflows. There's a single documentation as well. And today I want to talk a little bit more specifically to the healthcare industry. So I'm going to talk about our Conformity or CSPM tool and how it can actually help a lot of customers. But in the general overview across the platform, there's many different services that you might be using in your application that you can actually provide security controls to it, and even support during your migration process, because you're still going to have some applications running in your on-premise data center. So the platform can also support these applications that has not been migrated just yet. So going over across the CSPM tool that I mentioned, so Cloud One Conformity actually help customers to identify what we call misconfigurations. So misconfigurations has been one of the major concerns for customers, because it's not a package that is vulnerable inside of your application. It's not something that you can go to your code and change a little bit inside of your code and fix the problem. So these are actually configurations that AWS gives you the flexibility to create. So if you go to your S3 buckets, to your storage on AWS, they will allow you to do many different configurations to tailor exactly to the use case of your application. But sometimes you might create some configurations that could be improved, to a lack of a better word, but some of them can actually create vulnerabilities to your application itself. It's not something related to the code that you build, but how you actually provide these resources to the application so the application can use. So we call it misconfigurations. That's essentially configurations out of the best practices what AWS recommends. So to give a very simple example, you can create an S3 buckets on AWS without encryption and without versioning to the files that you upload to the S3. So there's many different best practices that you can apply to this to actually improve the way that you create infrastructure in AWS. And this is how actually the AWS Work Data Framework comes in, because the AWS Work Data Frameworks is exactly the best way and the most secure way that you can create infrastructure inside of AWS. So Cloud Conformity actually goes over each one of these configurations, providing, for example, auto check to automatically evaluate every single configurations that you create inside of your AWS cloud. And this is including multiple accounts in many different services. We actually support more than 90 different services across AWS, and this includes compute, this includes machine learning, cloud formation, and many other different. So there's 90 plus services that we cover, and we have almost 1,000 roles. I think the next 2 sprints that we have for the product, we're probably going to reach 1,000 roles into the platform. And as I mentioned, this will include many different services that you might use. You can use maybe machine learning and maybe EMR, Amazon Athena, many other different services on AWS. So we go over for each one of these services and recommend best practices that you can apply. And since Conformity was built on top of the Wildcat framework as well, we recommend exactly for each one of the pillars that you want to maybe improve. So Donny mentioned a little bit about the security pillar. For example, you can go to the security pillar, see how much level of compliance you have right now with the AWS best practices, and you can start to go slowly in improving your compliance at the Wildcat framework, for example. But moving a little bit out of the Wildcat framework, many different customers in the healthcare industry are actually worried about compliance as well. So instead of each rule that we built, we match that rule for many different compliance requirements that customers might have. So for the healthcare industry, for sure, we're going to have HIPAA, maybe high trust in some level, but that also covers many other different compliance requirements, such as GDPR, SOC 2, ISO, and many different others. So for the same platform, we're able to verify not only infrastructure best practices, but also making sure that you're meeting the right compliance for the right services that you're building. So this provides a lot of different advantage to customers that are not only already in AWS building applications over there, maybe building applications from scratch, new applications, but also in the process to migrate to AWS and to modernize the applications. That is very helpful because as soon as you can fix any kind of misconfigurations or some mistakes that are inside of your infrastructure, it's actually easy later on to not be able to fix those issues. So for example, if you already have an application running on AWS, to make any changes in the infrastructure side inside of your production environment is very difficult. So we don't want to stop your application to work. So as soon as you can actually identify all of these mistakes and making sure that you have the right information to actually be able to fix them, you'll be a lot easier than build an application and then later on evaluate the security controls to it. So this is one of the things that I was mentioning before to Matt, that if you can actually be able to integrate correctly security teams using tools like Conformity directly to your DevOps engineer or to your developers even, there'll be a lot of better relationship and a lot easier to actually identify the security issues and actually be able to fix them right away. So another thing that you can actually provide to customers using this platform is the ability to in real time identify all of these different security incidents and actually be able to provide remediation steps on how they can actually go there and remediate whatever issue they have. So for example, a very simple example would be encryption on S3 buckets or encryption on your EBS storage for your EC2 machines. So as soon as you can actually go there and be able to enable encryption, that'll be a lot easier. So we do provide some remediation steps, step-by-step instructions that you can go to your AWS console, to the AWS CLI, and actually be able to enable these security features instead of running your application and then later on actually enable them. So you can enable right in the moment that you're actually or migrating your applications or putting your application in production as well. Okay. Another thing that is very important to the Conformity platform, as I mentioned, is the Wildcat framework. So the Wildcat framework allows us to actually be able to attach every single rule to a specific pillar. So if you need to be compliant with AWS Wildcat framework, it's very easy in a Conformity platform because it's going to show individually each one of the pillars. And if you need to be compliant for each one of these pillars, you can individually go there and see all of the remediation steps for each one of the points for the Wildcat framework. But at the same time, for customers that is willing to be compliant and add governance to their AWS cloud, they can also use Conformity to actually be able to track every single requirement from the HIPAA compliance and go over every single remediation steps to fix any kind of security incident that they might have due to misconfigurations in their cloud environment as well. Talking a little bit about how we can actually do that, because for now I'm talking about how we can identify these issues and give some kind of information about the steps that you can take. But let's take a look on a real information basis, how we can go to the compliance review on conformity and actually be able to identify all the different pieces of information that we put together in a single report. So this is a very simple example for the WebActivity framework. And this will show, we go over inside of your AWS account, and then we do this on real-time basis and a schedule basis. So as soon as you create a resource on AWS that actually not goes through the WebActivity frameworks, not following the best practices, we can actually automate the process to actually notify you. So you can receive maybe a select message, or you can, for example, create a Jira ticket instead of your internal ticket system, things like that. So instead of the compliance review, you can actually see each one of the rules and what kind of action you can take instead of that specific requirements. So go over here very quickly. So this is the WebActivity framework, but we have the same for HIPAA as well. So if you want to see every single point for your HIPAA compliance, we'll also be able to show the same way as we show it here. So the most important part here is each one of the points. As you can see in the ID, you have the ID of the requirement for the WebActivity framework, and then you have the question, for example, how you design your workload so that we can understand the state of this workload. So this is more specifically to the workloads that you build on AWS Cloud. In this case, I have a CloudFormation stack notification that I did not enable for some of the resources that I have, and show you actually that I enabled for 32 of them, but for 17 of them, I did not enable this configuration in the CloudFormation. So it's going to show when the fail was introduced to my environment and how I can actually fix those. I can go directly to the source here. I have a link directly to my, in this case, my execution role. And then I can click on this button, resolve, on the right side, that allow me to go to very simple step-by-step instructions on how can I actually fix those issues. And this will go over for each one of the failures that I have in my environment. So I can actually have a central visibility where I can go to each one of the requirements, each one of the daily tasks that a security engineer might have to be able to meet compliance at the end of the story. So this is how the Conformity actually helps a lot of customers in the compliance review, not only for the best practices for the WebActivity framework, but at the same time for different compliance requirements such HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, and many others as well. And one of the another thing that is very important for the Conformity platform is the able to integrate with the developer tools that customers already have. So customers already integrate that in their CI/CD pipeline, to the DevOps process, to the workflows that they have. The idea is for Conformity to actually integrate with the tools that they have. So many developers, and I include myself a little bit on this, use VS Code on a daily basis. So you can actually scan CloudFormation templates on your VS Code. As soon as you deploy any kind of infrastructure to your AWS account, you can actually use many different CI/CD tools to do this. So we do have integration with Jenkins, Circle CI, GitLab, GitHub Actions, many other different as well. Code build and code pipeline as well from AWS Cloud. So you can actually integrate the process to allow a CloudFormation to be deployed and create dynamically infrastructure inside of your AWS account or not, based on the best practices that we actually evaluate inside of the Conformity platform. So this allows customers to, and developers and DevOps engineers to actually automate the process to evaluate best practices inside of and compliance as well, inside of your the building blocks that you're actually building on AWS. Okay, and all of these results will show up inside of the Conformity platform, so you can have central visibility for multiple accounts that you might have. Many customers take the routes to not only having one AWS account to build infrastructure, but they have a production account, they have a developer account, and then they have multiple other accounts to support different types of application that they might be building inside of AWS Cloud. Okay, so talking about the automation, I'm actually going to talk about two different use cases that we have here for many others that we have. So I'll talk about Exolis and other three. So they're both in a very regulated industry. So Exolis actually in the healthcare industry. So they provide analytics to providers and payers in the healthcare industry. They're actually taking leverage of conformity to make sure it can innovate a little bit better and then also be able to meet compliance. And other three is also using conformity a lot to make sure that can not slow down. So security cannot slow down the actual developers that are building applications in the cloud, so they can meet their HIPAA compliance. They can meet different types of compliance as well, using conformity as a main data source for how they're doing the compliance reviews as well. Okay. So this is just two examples, and this is an example specifically to the healthcare industry, but for the cloud platform, the many different services that we have to secure not just for compliance only, but also to secure different AWS services like EC2, Lambda functions, containers. There's for sure there'll be different services instead of a cloud one that can help customers to achieve their security goals as well. So with that being said, I pass by to Matt to wrap it up things for today.
Okay, thanks, Felipe. Appreciate the context here. So just to revisit where we started, the economy's put some challenges in front of us that we need to make sure that we enable business outcomes and with pressure to do more with less, there are a number of different useful resources in order to both secure workloads, meaning leverage AWS, and then wrapped around that, we can add some ISV tooling, namely the Trend Micro Cloud One platform, and that will help us help prevent us from making mistakes as we move. And then I think the last thing that I would just add on is Logicworks has built a fair bit of automation, leveraging infrastructure as code and other means to ensure that we put appropriate guardrails around workloads. So our cloud reliability platform helps ensure that we've got agents deployed where they should be deployed and not in other cases, helps pull some of the information out of tooling such as cloud security posture management feature sets that Felipe talked about and surface that into a NOC and offers long tail run and operate services to make sure that you've got someone actively responding to cloud environments when something goes bump in the night. So holistically, what we're hoping to offer to the marketplace is basically a stronger, better together offering where AWS and their shared responsibilities model combines with ISV tooling and services that deliver outcomes for customers in a cost-effective way that both meet security and business outcomes. So appreciate the opportunity to present here. With that, I think I will turn it back over to Tom and he can offer a final word.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate everyone, Matt, Felipe, and Donny today. So with all of this, we essentially are left with something of a dilemma. How do you manage compliance concerns in a way that still allows your organization to be agile? According to IDC Futurescape, by the end of 2023, 20% of expenses on care integration will center around trust to protect data, workflows, and transactions, as well as ensure ethical privacy compliance. So whether you're currently migrating or even if you're just thinking about migrating to the cloud, know that we are all here to help. For your foundation, AWS provides the building blocks to store your rapidly increasing data, and with over 200 universally featured resources from infrastructure to machine learning, there really, with AWS, is no limit to your growth in the cloud. Logicworks accelerates the journey to AWS, taking care of migration, modernization, cost optimization, and also security and compliance requirements. And also partners with Trend Micro, which helps organizations achieve HIPAA compliance, high trust compliance, and much more than just those two. Trend Micro Cloud One Conformity provides you visibility across your entire AWS environment. We handle the details so you can focus on building your business. We would all like to thank you all for joining today, for viewing this webinar. I, again, cannot enough thank Felipe, Donny, and Matt, our amazing presenters. There's a QR code here on the slide that if you scan, you can schedule your complimentary assessment. And in addition to that assessment, we will also send you a travel voucher for $200. Use that during this upcoming holiday season to your advantage. Thank you again. I know we did have a couple minutes for a Q&A session, Q&A portion here. One question that I actually had, and any of you three feel free to jump on and answer this one. But if we wanted to learn about how to get started with AWS security best practices, where would be the best place to go?
Yeah, so and I'll others may have some extra resources, but at AWS we have a public URL that is literally just just type in Amazon and security, and it'll be the security landing page, and it'll essentially walk you through high level capabilities, essentially aligned by capability or function. And that's probably the best place to get started with just overall services. But if you want to get like hands-on experience or dive deeper into each particular service, we actually have a training site and learning paths built out for security professionals with 14 hours of actual free training that allow you to kind of walk through a lot of services that are actually in the free tier of AWS. So if you want to get started and kind of have a low cost of entry, that's probably the best place to get started. And of course, if you ever have any questions, there's all kinds of different URLs and email addresses and such, but feel free to reach out to one of those or even myself, and we can get you answers to your questions.
Another way that you can actually start in the Cloud One platform to be able to get a sense on how the best practices you can implement inside of your environment is to use the security workshop that AWS has that we do actually together. It's available on a security workshop page on AWS. So there's a big piece of conformity, so provide a couple of different guidance. So it's a workshop that you can run yourself, or there's many different sessions that we actually offer together with AWS. So you can go over each one of the different best practices. You can scan CloudFormation into place. There's many different security features that we implement inside of the workshop. So this is a lot. It's a great place to start as well.
That is awesome, Donny, Felipe. Thank you. Now, beyond that, Felipe and Matt, maybe you know this as well. If we want to find some more offerings from either Trend Micro or Logicworks or both, any idea where we can get started?
Yeah, I can offer some insights there. Obviously, this team is a great place to start. I think encourage folks to leverage the QR code because, $200 is $200. And beyond that, Logicworks does have a fully functional sales force. We're happy to engage. You can also hit me on LinkedIn if you're interested. So any of those are meaningful ways to engage the team. I would just say, even if it's not about buying something, there's some passion projects here, like Donny's, the work that he's done related to his landing zone accelerator, and some of the work that I've done related to the book and other things. So happy to engage outside of just a purely sales-driven engagement, and then obviously see if we can add value to individual attendees in that way. But lots of different methods, and I think the QR code's probably the route that I would go, but happy to chat with folks outside of that venue as well.
And
Perfect.
Tom, I would just
go ahead, Donny.
I'd just like to add that both Logicworks and Trend Micro are both listed in our Amazon partner and marketplace, so that for folks that are looking to kind of explore and leverage that resource, that's something that they can do as well.
Awesome. Okay, great. That is also helpful. All right, I know we're coming up on time here, so we'll close things out. Just another thank you to our presenters, Matt, Donny, and Felipe. Wonderful job all. And You provided everyone with so much insight that is so valuable as we look ahead to 2023. And thank you to those who joined. And a quick reminder, if you maybe for those who were not able to join, let them know, or if you had to miss part of this, this will be available on demand. We'll be sure to share a link for you all. So check it out. Or if you just like to take another look at a portion or two of this awesome presentation, that will be an option for you. So thank you all. We can't thank you enough, and look forward to seeing what all AWS, Logicworks, and Trend Micro can do over the rest of 2022 into 2023 and well beyond.